Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another collection of stories for you today. And as always, we're keeping things calm with some peaceful Minecraft in the background while we dive into the chaos. Today's lineup is absolutely wild, and I think you're going to enjoy every second of it. Before we get into everything, I just gotta say, you guys have been wild with the support lately. I seriously didn't expect this many people to pull up, comment, and show love. Thank you for real. It means a lot. So, our first story starts with a discovery that would make anyone's blood run cold. Imagine finding out that your most private, intimate moments weren't actually private at all, and that someone you trusted had been profiting from your vulnerability without you ever knowing. Let's get into it. I should have trusted my gut months ago, but you know how it is when you're in love. You ignore the red flags, convince yourself you're being paranoid, tell yourself that everyone deserves privacy. But looking back now, the signs were everywhere. My boyfriend had started acting strange around his phone, like genuinely weird about it. He'd angle it away from me during conversations, take it with him to the bathroom every single time, and if I so much as glanced in his direction while he was scrolling, he'd lock the screen immediately. At first, I thought maybe he was planning a surprise for me, like a vacation or a proposal or something sweet like that. God, I was so stupidly optimistic. The weird phone behavior was one thing, but then he started positioning himself oddly during our intimate moments. He'd insist on certain angles, certain positions, always making sure we were facing specific directions in the bedroom. I thought maybe he was just getting creative, trying to keep things exciting. I even felt a little flattered that he seemed so enthusiastic. What I didn't know was that he was making sure we were both in frame for the cameras he'd hidden around our bedroom. Cameras I had absolutely no idea existed. It all came crashing down on a random Tuesday night. He was in the shower and I wanted to watch Netflix on his laptop since mine was charging in the bedroom. I opened it up and there it was, just sitting there in an open tab. OnlyFans Creator Dashboard. My brain couldn't process it at first. I just stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The username wasn't his name, but the profile picture was definitely our bedroom, and the subscriber count made my stomach drop. Thousands. He had thousands of subscribers. I should have closed the laptop right then. I should have confronted him immediately, but I didn't. Instead, I clicked. I clicked on the content library, and that's when my entire world shattered into a million pieces. Our bedroom, our bed, videos of us, intimate moments that I thought were private, personal, sacred. Moments where I was completely vulnerable, completely trusting, completely unaware that I was being filmed and broadcast to strangers on the internet. There were dozens of videos, some from angles I didn't even understand, until I started looking around our bedroom with fresh eyes and spotted them. Tiny cameras hidden in picture frames, in the bookshelf, in a charging dock on the nightstand. The breaking point came when I opened the Messages tab. I don't know what possessed me to look, maybe some self-destructive need to know the full extent of the betrayal, but I clicked on his subscriber messages, and there it was, in his own words, bragging to paying strangers about his unsuspecting girlfriend. He called me clueless. He joked about how easy it was to position me for better shots. He shared details about our relationship, about me, things that were none of these strangers' business. One message made me physically ill. A subscriber had asked if I knew I was being filmed, and my boyfriend had responded with a laughing emoji and said that was half the fun. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Now, back to how I made sure he paid for every single second of that betrayal. I didn't confront him that night. I know that probably sounds crazy, but I needed to be smart about this. I needed evidence, documentation, everything that would protect me legally and make sure he couldn't worm his way out of what he'd done. So I took screenshots, hundreds of them, every video thumbnail, every subscriber message where he bragged about filming me without consent, every piece of evidence that proved he'd been monetizing our relationship and my body without my knowledge or permission for 8 months. 8 entire months of betrayal, of violation, of treating me like I was just content for his subscribers. I created a folder on a cloud drive he couldn't access. I documented everything, the camera locations, the upload dates, the revenue reports that showed he'd been making serious money off of this. $47,000. That's what his projected annual revenue was listed as in the Creator Analytics. He'd been pulling in almost $4,000 a month by violating my privacy and my trust. Every romantic moment, every vulnerable second I'd shared with him thinking we were alone, he'd been calculating how much money it would make him. The next morning, while he was at work, I contacted OnlyFans directly. I sent them everything: proof that I was in the videos, proof that I never consented to being filmed or to having those videos distributed, copies of the messages where he explicitly admitted I didn't know. I filed a police report that same day. I sat in that police station for 3 hours, going through every detail with an officer who looked more disturbed with each piece of evidence I showed her. Then I called a lawyer, one who specialized in cases like this, and sent her the entire evidence folder. OnlyFans responded faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, his account was permanently banned. Gone. Every video deleted, every subscriber lost, every dollar of projected revenue vanished. I wish I could have seen his face when he got that notification. Actually, I take that back. I never wanted to see his face again. He came home that evening and immediately knew something was wrong. Maybe OnlyFans had notified him. Maybe he'd tried to log in and couldn't. I don't know. But he walked in and saw my suitcases by the door, saw the look on my face, and he knew. He tried to explain. Actually, explain isn't the right word. He tried to minimize it, justify it, make it seem like it wasn't that bad. He said he was going to tell me eventually. He said he thought I'd be proud of his entrepreneurial spirit. He actually used those words, entrepreneurial spirit, like he'd started a small business instead of committing a federal crime. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just told him that he had federal charges coming his way for distributing intimate images without consent, that I'd already moved my important belongings out, and that if he ever contacted me again for any reason other than through lawyers, I'd file for a restraining order. The look on his face was almost worth it. Almost. Nothing could actually make up for what he'd done, but watching him realize that his entire scheme had blown up in his face came pretty close. I moved in with my sister that week. The legal process has been long and exhausting, but he's now facing serious federal charges. Distribution of intimate images without consent carries real prison time in our state, and with the amount of content he distributed and the money he made from it, his lawyer apparently told him he's looking at actual years behind bars, not just probation. His family has tried to reach out to me, begging me to drop the charges, saying he made a mistake and doesn't deserve to have his life ruined. His mother actually called me vindictive, for pressing charges against someone who filmed me without consent and sold those videos to thousands of strangers for profit. I haven't dropped anything. I'm seeing this through to the end. The worst part isn't even the betrayal anymore. As strange as that sounds, it's knowing that those videos are probably still out there somewhere, that subscribers might have downloaded them before the account was banned, that there are strangers who've seen me in my most vulnerable moments. My lawyer says we can pursue anyone who redistributes the content, but we both know that's nearly impossible to fully stop once something's on the internet. Some days I'm angry, some days I'm just tired, but I never regret leaving, and I never regret pressing charges. What he did wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, ongoing violation that he committed every single day for 8 months. He looked me in the eye every morning, knowing what he was doing, knowing he was profiting off my trust, and he did it anyway. That's not someone who deserves forgiveness. That's someone who deserves exactly what's coming to him. But stolen privacy wasn't the only workplace nightmare I encountered, because what happened next involved a colleague who thought sabotage was a career strategy. I was 3 weeks away from the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. 3 weeks. I'd already mentally planned how I'd celebrate, what my new office would look like, the whole thing. Then one Tuesday morning, I got an email from HR asking me to come in for an urgent meeting. No context, no explanation. Just, please come to conference room B at 2 p.m. I sat there in that beige corporate room with Linda from HR and my manager David, both wearing these weird, serious faces. Linda slid a folder across the table. Inside were screenshots of Slack messages, supposedly from me, absolutely trashing our CEO. I'm talking brutal stuff, calling him incompetent, saying the company was a joke, suggesting he only got his position through nepotism. My stomach dropped. I stared at those screenshots and felt this weird out-of-body experience because I knew, with absolute certainty, that I never wrote any of that. I looked up at them and just said it straight. I didn't send these. Linda gave me this look like she'd heard that before, like every person who gets caught says the same thing. David wouldn't even make eye contact. I could feel my career imploding in real time. The messages had my name, my profile picture, timestamps from the last few weeks. They looked completely legitimate. But here's the thing, I'm not an idiot. I knew something was off. I asked them to show me exactly where these messages came from. Linda explained that another employee, she wouldn't say who at first, had come forward with concerns about workplace toxicity and provided these screenshots as evidence. I felt my face get hot. Someone was setting me up and I had a pretty good idea who. Jenna. My coworker Jenna had been gunning for the same promotion. We'd both been in the final running and honestly, I thought we were friends. We'd grabbed coffee together, talked about career goals, even collaborated on projects. Apparently I was wrong about that. I took a breath and said very calmly that I wanted IT to pull the actual server logs from Slack. If I sent those messages, they'd be in the backend system, time stamped and archived. Linda and David exchanged glances. David said they'd look into it, but in the meantime, I was being placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. Suspension. I'd never been suspended from anything in my life. I walked out of that building in a daze, got to my car, and just sat there for 20 minutes trying to process what just happened. The next 4 days were absolute hell. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just kept replaying everything in my head. I thought about all the times Jenna had been overly interested in my projects, asking detailed questions about my strategies, my communications with upper management. I remembered how she'd borrowed my laptop once when hers died during a meeting. Had she done something then? I didn't know, but I knew I had to figure this out. On day 2 of my suspension, I got a call from David. It had pulled the logs. The messages didn't exist on Slack's backend. Not a single one. There was no record of me ever typing those words, no metadata, nothing. They were complete fabrications. I felt this rush of relief mixed with absolute rage. Someone had gone to the effort of creating fake screenshots to destroy my career, and we all knew it was Jenna. Here's where it gets absurd. Instead of just waiting for HR to handle it, I decided to do some digging myself. If Jenna was willing to fabricate evidence for a promotion, what else had she done? I started with a basic Google search of her name plus her previous company. That's when I found it. A lawsuit settlement from 3 years ago. Public record, available to anyone who knew where to look. Jenna had been sued by her former employer for defamation and fraud after she'd fabricated emails to frame a co-worker for embezzlement. The case was settled out of court. She'd been quietly let go, and apparently she'd just moved on to our company like nothing happened. I printed everything. The court documents, the settlement agreement, news articles from local business publications that had covered the case. Then I compiled a timeline showing the pattern. Jenna gets hired, gets close to someone in her way, fabricates evidence, tries to eliminate competition. I put it all in a folder and requested another meeting with HR. When I walked back into that conference room, Linda's face was already different. She knew the Slack messages were fake. She apologized for the suspension, said they were still investigating how this happened. I slid my folder across the table, just like she'd done to me 4 days earlier. I watched her face change as she read through the documents. David went pale. This wasn't just workplace drama anymore. This was a pattern of criminal behavior. They called Jenna in that afternoon. I wasn't in the room, but I heard about it later from David. Jenna apparently tried to deny everything at first, claimed the Slack screenshots were real, and IT must have made a mistake. Then they showed her the court documents from her previous job. She went quiet. Tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to protect the company from toxic employees. Linda asked her directly if she fabricated the screenshots. Jenna started crying, said she was under a lot of pressure, that she deserved the promotion more than I did, that it wasn't fair. Security escorted her out within the hour. I watched from my desk as she packed her things into a cardboard box, mascara running down her face, refusing to look at anyone. Part of me felt bad for about 3 seconds. Then I remembered that she tried to destroy my entire career over a job title and a pay bump. The next day, I had another meeting with HR and David. Formal apology, full reinstatement, back pay for the suspension days. Then David told me the promotion was mine, effective immediately. Jenna's termination letter, which I wasn't supposed to see, but David showed me anyway, cited fraud, defamation, and violation of company ethics policy. She was also banned from ever working for any of our partner companies, which in our industry was basically career suicide. I moved into my new office 2 weeks later, found out through the grapevine that Jenna had tried to apply to several competitors and kept getting rejected after background checks. Turns out when you have two separate instances of fabricating evidence to sabotage coworkers, companies tend to not want to hire you. Funny how that works. The wildest part? A few months later, I got a LinkedIn message from someone who'd worked with Jenna at another company before the one that sued her. Same pattern. She tried to frame someone there too, but they'd caught on before it went too far and just quietly moved her to a different department. She'd been doing this for years and finally it caught up with her. I still have those court documents in a folder on my desk. Not because I'm petty, but because it's a good reminder that some people will do absolutely anything to get ahead, and sometimes the best thing you can do is just let them expose themselves. Jenna didn't lose because I outmaneuvered her. She lost because she kept using the same playbook over and over until someone finally called her bluff. You almost have to admire the audacity, honestly. Imagine being so confident in your ability to manipulate people that you try the exact same scheme multiple times across multiple companies. At some point, you'd think self-awareness would kick in, but apparently not. Speaking of people who thought they were untouchable, let me tell you about the time someone's GPS put them exactly where they claimed they'd never been. We'd been sharing our locations for about a year at that point. It started out as a safety thing, just in case something happened to one of us. I could see where he was, he could see where I was, no big deal. Honestly, I rarely even checked it. I trusted him completely. Looking back, that trust feels almost insulting now, like I was this naive idiot who couldn't see what was right in front of me. It was a Tuesday evening when I noticed something off. He'd texted me around 6 saying he had to work late, some urgent project that needed finishing before a client meeting in the morning. Normal enough. He worked in consulting and late nights weren't unusual. I said no problem, told him I'd save him some dinner, the usual domestic routine we'd fallen into. Then around 8:30, I was scrolling through my phone, bored, and I opened the location app just out of habit. His PIN wasn't at his office. It was across town at some residential address I'd never seen before. I stared at it for a minute, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was at a client's house. Maybe the project required an in-person meeting. But something in my gut told me to pay attention. I zoomed in on the map. It was just a regular neighborhood, nothing commercial about it. The PIN sat there, stationary, like he'd been there for a while. I should have called him first. That would have been the reasonable thing to do. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove across town to that address. 23 minutes in the car, my mind racing through every possible explanation, each one more unsettling than the last. When I pulled up to the house, there was his car. Right there in the driveway, just sitting there like it belonged there. My hands were shaking as I turned off my engine. I walked up to the door and knocked. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The door opened and a woman stood there, probably around my age, visibly pregnant, very pregnant, like 3rd trimester pregnant. She looked at me with this confused smile and called back into the house. "Honey, there's someone at the door." Honey. She called him honey. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. He came to the door, saw me standing there, and the color drained from his face, just completely went white. The woman looked between us, her smile fading as she started to piece together that something was very wrong. I heard myself ask, "Who is this?" But my voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. The woman's name was Michelle. She invited me inside, which sounds insane, but I think we were both in shock. We sat in her kitchen while everything unraveled. She was his fiancée. They'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. They were planning a wedding for next spring. She was 7 months pregnant with his child, and she had absolutely no idea I existed. I told her I was his girlfriend of 2.5 years, that we lived together in an apartment downtown, that I was 4 months pregnant. I watched her face process that information, the same way mine was processing what she'd just told me. Neither of us knew about the other. For 2 entire years, he'd been living a complete double life. That's when everything unraveled. We started comparing stories, schedules, photos, timelines. He'd told Michelle he traveled for work constantly, that he was on the road 3 or 4 days a week. Those were the days he was with me. He'd told me he worked late most evenings and sometimes had to stay at a hotel near the office for early morning meetings. Those were the nights he was with her. Every business trip, every late night, every weekend where he claimed he had to catch up on work, it was all carefully orchestrated lies. Michelle pulled out her phone and showed me photos. Their engagement party, a vacation they'd taken to the mountains, Christmas morning in this very house. I pulled out mine, our anniversary dinner 2 months ago, a weekend trip we'd taken to the coast, his birthday party that I'd thrown for him. Two completely separate lives, running parallel, never supposed to intersect. The level of planning this required was actually staggering. 2 phone numbers, 2 social media accounts, 2 complete sets of friends and family who never overlapped. He'd been maintaining this for years, and neither of us had suspected a thing. Michelle started crying. I was too numb to cry. I just felt this cold rage settling into my chest. Things went from bad to unhinged. She called him, put it on speaker. He was apparently at the gym, his third location that he used when he needed an excuse to be away from both of us. She asked him where he was, and he said the gym, casual as anything. She asked if he was alone. He hesitated just for a second, then said yes. She told him to come home immediately, that we needed to talk. The panic in his voice when he asked what was wrong would have been satisfying if the situation wasn't so devastating. He walked through the door 30 minutes later and stopped dead when he saw both of us sitting there at the kitchen table. I'd never seen anyone literally frozen in fear before. He tried to speak, stammered out something about how he could explain, but Michelle cut him off. She slid a piece of paper across the table. We'd spent the last half hour writing down everything, every lie, every duplicate event, every piece of evidence we had between us. He tried the denial route first, said Michelle was confused, that I was just a friend from work, that this was all a misunderstanding. I held up my phone and showed him the photo from last week, where we'd announced my pregnancy on social media. His face on my account, tagged, with dozens of congratulations from mutual friends. He switched tactics, tried the apology route, said he never meant to hurt either of us, that he loved us both, that he didn't know how it got this far. Michelle asked him which one of us he chose, like this was some kind of reality show where he could just pick his favorite. He actually opened his mouth to answer before I stopped him. I told him neither of us was a choice he got to make anymore. We'd already decided. We were both done. We'd contacted a lawyer together during those 30 minutes while waiting for him to arrive. Found one who specialized in family law and paternity cases. Michelle and I had already decided we were both keeping our babies, but we wanted everything documented, everything legal, everything ironclad, so he couldn't weasel out of his responsibilities to either child. I moved out that night, stayed with my sister while I figured out next steps. Michelle kept the house since it was in her name. We actually became friends through all of this, which is probably the strangest outcome. We text regularly, send each other updates, share resources about single parenting. Our kids are going to be half siblings, and we figured we might as well make the best of this impossible situation. Last I heard, he's paying child support to both of us. His family found out everything and basically disowned him. His mom actually reached out to both Michelle and me to apologize for raising someone capable of this level of deception. Michelle's parents wanted to press charges for fraud or something, but the lawyer said it wasn't quite criminal, just morally reprehensible. The pregnancy announcement posts are still up on both our social media accounts. We never deleted them. People who knew him from both lives eventually figured it out, and the Whisper Network did its thing. He can't go anywhere in this city without people knowing exactly what he did. That feels like justice, even if the legal system couldn't provide it. I still think about the logistics sometimes, how he kept it all straight, how he never slipped up until that one Tuesday when his GPS gave him away. All it took was one location ping to bring down 2 years of elaborate lies. You'd think someone would get tired maintaining that level of deception, but apparently some people are just wired differently. They can look you in the eye, tell you they love you, plan a future with you, all while doing the exact same thing with someone else across town. But double lives weren't just reserved for romantic partners. Sometimes family members were hiding the biggest secrets of all. My mum always had this reputation in our family and our community as the ultimate self-sacrificing single mother. She'd tell anyone who would listen about how hard she worked, how she gave up everything to raise me, how she never had help from anyone. Every holiday, every family gathering, it was the same performance, the martyr routine. I grew up hearing about her struggles, her sacrifices, how lucky I was to have a mother who cared so much. And I believed it. Why wouldn't I? Thanksgiving 2 years ago, everything I thought I knew imploded in about 60 seconds. We were setting the table, my mum was in the kitchen doing her usual hosting stress routine when the doorbell rang. I answered it because I was closest. Standing on our porch was a couple in their mid-30s and two kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. The woman smiled at me and asked, "Is Maria here?" I told her there was no Maria at this address, that she probably had the wrong house. She pulled out her phone, checked the address, and insisted this was right. She asked if a woman in her late 50s lived here, gave a description that matched my mum exactly, except she used a different name. Maria. My mum's name was Anne, had been Anne my entire life. I called for my mum, told her some people were asking for someone named Maria. She came around the corner, dish towel in hand, looked at the people on the porch, and I watched all the color drain from her face. Just completely white, like she'd seen a ghost. The woman on the porch said very quietly, "Hi, Mom." Mom. She called my mother Mom. My mum tried to close the door, actually physically tried to shut the door on these people. The man put his hand out to stop it and said they just wanted to talk, that they'd come a long way. I stood there completely frozen, trying to process what was happening. My mom had other children, adult children. Children who were calling her by a completely different name. We ended up in the living room, this surreal Thanksgiving intervention that nobody planned. The woman's name was Carmen. The man was her husband, Alex. The kids were their children, my mum's grandchildren that she'd never met. And Carmen wasn't alone in this search. She had a brother, Daniel, who couldn't make the trip but was on speakerphone within minutes. That's when everything unraveled. Carmen started talking, and the story that came out was devastating. 26 years ago, my mum had been married to a man named Richard in Nevada. They had two small children, Carmen, who was 3, and Daniel, who was 18 months old. One day, my mum told Richard she was going to visit her sister in California for a week. She never came back, just vanished. Changed her name from Maria Gonzalez to Ann Mitchell, moved to our state, met my dad, and started a completely new life. She'd abandoned 2 toddlers and never looked back. Carmen had letters, physical letters that their mum, my mum, had written in those first few months, promising she'd come back soon, that she just needed time to figure things out, that she loved them. The letters stopped after about 6 months. She also had bank statements showing that right before my mum disappeared, she'd drained their joint account, took everything and left her first family with nothing. I sat there listening to this, looking at my mum who wouldn't make eye contact with anyone, and felt my entire childhood reshape itself in my mind. Every sacrifice story, every guilt trip about how much she'd given up for me, every time she'd played the victim, it was all built on the foundation of her abandoning 2 babies. She hadn't sacrificed anything. She'd run away from responsibility and built a new life pretending the old one never existed. My mum finally tried to speak, started with how young she was, how overwhelmed, how she didn't know what else to do. Carmen cut her off, said she didn't come for excuses, that she'd heard every possible justification in her head for 26 years. She came because she needed to see her mother's face one time, as an adult, and tell her exactly what her disappearance had done to them. And here's where it gets absurd. Daniel, over the phone, started listing the consequences. The years in therapy, their father's depression and struggle to raise 2 kids alone while working 2 jobs. The abandonment issues that affected every relationship they tried to have. The hole in their lives where a mother was supposed to be. Foster care stints when their dad couldn't make ends meet. Christmases and birthdays wondering if this would be the year she'd remember them. My mum tried the self-pity route, started crying, saying she thought about them every day, that leaving was the hardest thing she ever did. Carmen looked at her with this cold expression and asked if it was harder than finding your mother 26 years later and discovering she just started a whole new family, like you never existed. Asked if it was harder than explaining to your own children why they didn't have a grandmother on your side of the family. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I asked my mum if my dad knew. She shook her head. He didn't know. Nobody knew. She'd constructed this entire false identity, and my dad, who passed away 3 years ago, died never knowing he'd married someone living under a fake name with an abandoned family in another state. The kids, Carmen's children, were watching all of this with wide eyes. One of them asked if I was their aunt. Technically, I was their half-aunt. These were my niece and nephew that I'd never known existed. I had a whole brother and sister that I'd grown up as an only child never knowing about. Carmen said they didn't come for money or reconciliation. They came for closure. They needed to look their mother in the face, tell her what she'd done, and then move on with their lives knowing they'd tried. She said they'd spent years searching, hiring private investigators, following dead ends, until finally the PI found the name change documentation and tracked her here. My mum begged them to understand, to forgive her, said she was different now. Daniel, still on speaker, asked if she'd changed her name back, if she'd tried to find them, if she'd ever sent money or checked in to see if they were okay. The answer to all of it was no. She'd just moved on and pretended they didn't exist. They left about an hour later. Carmen gave me her number, said if I ever wanted to talk or get to know them, she'd like that none of this was my fault, and I was as much a victim of our mother's lies as they were. I took the number. I couldn't even look at my mum. The next month was brutal. I kept thinking about every story she'd told me growing up, trying to figure out what was real and what was performance. My dad's family was furious when they found out, felt betrayed on his behalf. Some of them wanted to press charges for identity fraud or something, but the lawyers said too much time had passed. I moved out within a month, got my own place across town, started having regular coffee meetings with Carmen and video calls with Daniel. They're good people who got dealt a terrible hand by someone who was supposed to protect them. We're building a relationship now, getting to know each other as adults, sharing stories about our lives. My mom tried to maintain contact with me at first, long texts explaining her side, how young and scared she was, how she thought they'd be better off without her. I eventually told her I needed space, a lot of space, maybe forever space. She lost both families in one day. Carmen and Daniel got their closure and moved on. I got a truth I never wanted but needed to know. There's something darkly poetic about spending decades running from your past, only to have it show up on your doorstep during Thanksgiving dinner. She really wrote her own ending on that one. And if you think that family revelation was devastating, wait until you hear what I found written in pages my dad never meant anyone to read. I never thought I'd be the type to go through someone's belongings after they died. It felt invasive, like reading someone's diary without permission. But Dad had been gone for 3 weeks, and someone had to clean out the attic. Mum couldn't bring herself to do it, and my sister was still too much of a mess, so it fell to me. The attic was exactly what you'd expect. Boxes of old tax documents, Christmas decorations, my childhood art projects that nobody had the heart to throw away. I was about to call it a day when I spotted a leather journal wedged between some books on a shelf in the corner. It looked old, the kind of thing you'd buy at one of those fancy stationery stores. I pulled it out and saw the year embossed on the front, 1989. I sat down on an old trunk and opened it. The handwriting was definitely Dad's, that careful, blocky script he used for everything. The first entry was dated January 8th, 1989. Met someone today who made me feel alive for the first time in years. His name starts with L, and I can't write more than that, can't risk it. But God, I haven't felt this way since college. I read that line 3 times before it sank in. His, not her, his. I kept reading, entry after entry, spanning months, then years. Dad wrote about Elle with this aching tenderness I'd never associated with my father. He wrote about stolen afternoons, hotel rooms in cities where nobody knew them, phone calls made from payphones because cell phones didn't exist yet, and home phones kept records. He wrote about the guilt, the constant fear of being discovered, the exhaustion of maintaining a double life. One entry from 1992 hit me like a truck. Took the kids to the park today. They're getting so big. I love them more than anything, but I look at other fathers and wonder if they feel this same hollow ache. I married their mother because it was what my family expected. Because it was 1987 and men like me didn't have other options, not in this town, not in this life. She's a good woman. She deserves better than half a husband. But that wasn't even the worst part. The entries continued through the 90s. Into the early 2000s, Elle was a constant presence, mentioned in coded language, never by full name. They'd been seeing each other for decades, my entire childhood, my teenage years, my college graduation that Dad attended with Mom by his side, all of it happening while he maintained this secret relationship with someone we never knew existed. The final entry was dated 3 months before Dad died. His handwriting was shakier by then, the cancer already taking its toll. Elle is gone. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. I couldn't even go to the funeral. Couldn't risk questions about why I was there, who I was to him. I sent flowers anonymously. 43 years of loving someone, and I couldn't even publicly mourn him. I love my family, but I've never known real freedom. I wonder if I ever will. I sat in that attic and cried for an hour. Not just because Dad was gay and had hidden it his entire life, but because he died without ever getting to live authentically. He'd spent over 4 decades pretending to be someone he wasn't, loving someone in secret, never getting to hold his partner's hand in public, or introduce him to his family, or build a real life together. I took the journal downstairs. Mum was in the kitchen making tea, going through the motions like she had been since the funeral. I put the journal on the table in front of her and asked if she knew. She looked at the cover, closed her eyes for a long moment and nodded. She already knew. They'd had an arrangement. Mom explained it all sitting at that kitchen table. She'd found out about Elle early in their marriage, maybe 5 or 6 years in. She'd been devastated at first, felt betrayed and lied to. But then they'd talked, really talked, and Dad had broken down. Told her everything, how he'd known since he was 14, how his father had made it clear that being gay wasn't acceptable, wasn't even possible in their family. How he'd tried to change, tried to pray it away, tried to be the son his parents wanted. Mum said she'd had a choice then. Leave him and blow up both their lives, or stay and build something different. She loved him. Not romantically, not in the way he loved Elle, but she genuinely cared about him. They were friends, partners, co-parents. They decided to stay married, to raise us kids together, to maintain appearances for the sake of his family and their community. She'd met Elle once, years ago. Dad had wanted them to know each other, wanted the two most important people in his life to at least have a conversation. They'd met for coffee while Dad was supposedly at a work conference. Mum said Elle was kind, quiet, clearly devoted to Dad. They'd talked about Dad like proud parents discussing their kid, sharing stories, finding common ground in their love for the same person. And here's where it gets absurd. I asked Mom if she resented it, if she felt like she'd wasted her life. She looked at me like I'd asked if the sky was green. She said she'd made a choice with full knowledge of the situation, that Dad had been a good husband in the ways that mattered to her, that they'd built a family together, raised kids who turned out okay, supported each other through decades of life. Was it conventional? No. Was it what she'd imagined when she was young? Definitely not. But it was her life, and she didn't regret it. My sister took it harder when I told her. She felt betrayed, like our whole childhood had been a lie. I get that. Part of me felt that way too, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized Dad had been exactly who we knew him to be. Patient, kind, always showing up for us. The fact that he was gay didn't change any of that. It just added context to the sadness I'd sometimes see in his eyes, the way he'd stare out windows like he was somewhere else. I did some research and found Elle's obituary. Died 6 years ago, preceded in death by his parents and a sister. No mention of a partner or spouse. Just this clinical list of accomplishments and surviving family members. No hint of the 4-decade relationship he'd had with my father. Like that whole part of his life had been erased. I visited Dad's grave a week later, brought a small rainbow flag and stuck it in the ground next to his headstone. The cemetery probably removed it eventually, but I needed to do it. Needed some acknowledgement, however brief, that he'd been a gay man who'd loved someone deeply and never got to live that truth publicly. The thing that haunts me most is that Dad died in 2024. Marriage equality has been legal for almost a decade. Society isn't perfect, but it's so much more accepting than it was when he was young. If he'd been born even 20 years later, his whole life could have been different. He could have married Elle, introduced him at family dinners, grown old together openly. Instead, he spent his entire life hiding, maintaining a careful facade, loving someone in secret, and when that person died, he couldn't even grieve publicly. Just had to pretend everything was fine while his heart broke in private. I think about that last journal entry a lot. I've never known real freedom. That's what kills me. My dad lived 72 years and never got to be fully himself. Never got to wake up next to the person he loved without fear. Never got to hold hands walking down the street, or dance together at a wedding, or do any of the thousand small things that people in love get to do. I like to think that wherever he is now, he's found that freedom, that he and Elle are together somewhere, finally able to just be. No hiding, no fear, no pretending. Just two people who loved each other, getting to exist in that love without shame or secrecy. I just wish he'd felt safe enough to tell us while he was alive. I would have understood. I would have loved him exactly the same. But I guess that's the point. He didn't know that, couldn't risk it. And that's the real tragedy. Not every secret stayed buried in journals, though. Some exploded into public view the moment a guest list was finalized. I volunteered to handle RSVPs for our family reunion, because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment. First reunion in 15 years, and everyone was making this big deal about reconnecting, healing old wounds, all that sentimental stuff you say when you haven't seen your relatives in over a decade. My mum was so excited about it she'd been planning for months. Venue booked, catering ordered, the whole thing. I just had to manage the spreadsheet and keep track of who was coming. The RSVPs started rolling in pretty normally at first. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark, yes. Cousin Jessica and her husband Tom, yes. My brother and his family, obviously yes. Then I got to my Uncle Dave's response. He'd clicked yes and added a +1. The name listed was Rachel. I stared at that for a minute because my Uncle Dave has been married to my Aunt Susan for 23 years. I know this because they never shut up about their anniversary. I figured maybe it was a typo or maybe Susan was using her middle name for some weird reason. So I called my aunt to confirm. Just a quick, hey, I have you listed as Rachel on the RSVP. Wanted to make sure that's right. The silence on the other end of the line lasted way too long. Then she said, very slowly, who is Rachel? My stomach dropped. I tried to backtrack, said maybe I'd read it wrong, but she was already spiraling. She made me send her a screenshot of the RSVP. I heard her breathing change on the phone, then she said she had to go and hung up. 10 minutes later, my phone exploded with texts from various family members, because apparently Aunt Susan had immediately called Uncle Dave, and Uncle Dave had apparently been seeing Rachel for 8 months. The family group chat, which had been peacefully discussing potato salad recipes, turned into an absolute dumpster fire. My mom was trying to calm everyone down. Aunt Susan was posting screenshots of text messages she'd found on Uncle Dave's phone. Uncle Dave left the group chat entirely. 3 cousins were arguing about whether we should still have the reunion, or if this ruined everything. I just sat there watching my phone blow up, wondering how a simple RSVP had detonated a marriage. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 days later, my cousin Melissa sent me a private message asking to be removed from the guest list. She said something had come up and she couldn't make it anymore. I told her that was fine and asked if everything was okay. She sent back this long, rambling message about how she'd just found out that one of the guests was going to be there, and it would be too awkward, and she couldn't handle the drama. I asked who. She said James. James was her husband's brother, who was also on the guest list with his wife. I was confused because I'd never known there to be any issue between Melissa and James. They'd always seemed friendly at past family events, so I asked what the problem was. She called me instead of texting back, and I could tell she'd been crying. Then she just came out with it. She'd been having an affair with James for 2 years. Her husband didn't know. James's wife didn't know. And now they'd both be at this reunion, and she couldn't handle being in the same room, pretending everything was fine. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I told Melissa I'd mark her as not attending and suggested maybe she should deal with her situation before it imploded the way Uncle Dave's had. She agreed and hung up. I updated the spreadsheet and decided I needed a drink even though it was 11 in the morning. That's when my phone rang again. This time it was my Aunt Carol, my mum's sister, who I'd always considered the most stable, boring member of our family. She asked if she could talk to me about something sensitive regarding the reunion. I braced myself. She told me that she'd seen the guest list and noticed that my mum had invited someone named Patricia, who apparently worked at the family business my grandfather had started back in the 70s. Aunt Carol wanted to know why a random employee was invited to a family reunion. I checked my notes. Patricia wasn't an employee. She was listed as a +1 for my Uncle Robert. Aunt Carol went quiet again. Another one of those terrible silences that I was learning meant something awful was about to come out. Then she said, I need to tell you something, and you need to promise not to tell your mother yet. I should have said no. I should have hung up. Instead, I promised. 20 years ago, Aunt Carol had embezzled about $40,000 from the family business. She'd been handling the books and had been going through a divorce and made some very bad choices. She'd been paying it back secretly ever since through a complicated scheme involving Patricia, who'd helped her cover it up and had been receiving monthly payments to keep quiet. Now Patricia was coming to the reunion as Uncle Robert's girlfriend, and Aunt Carol was terrified the whole thing was going to come out. I asked her if Uncle Robert knew about any of this. She said no. I asked if my grandfather had known before he died. She said no. I asked if literally anyone besides Patricia knew. She said no. Until now. Until me. Great. The family group chat was still exploding with the Uncle Dave and Aunt Susan situation. Multiple people were now saying we should cancel the reunion. My mom was insisting we could work through this as a family. Someone suggested family therapy. Someone else suggested we just exclude Uncle Dave. Aunt Susan said if Dave was uninvited, then Rachel better be uninvited too, which was already a given, but emotions were running high. Then came the breaking point. My cousin Tyler, who'd been weirdly quiet through all of this, posted a message in the group chat that just said, if we're airing out family secrets, I have one. My mom immediately tried to shut it down, said this wasn't the time or place. Tyler posted anyway. Turns out my Uncle Steve, my dad's brother, had fathered a child with a woman he'd had an affair with back in '97. The kid was now 28 years old, knew about the family, and Tyler had been in contact with them for the past year. Tyler thought the reunion would be a good time to introduce everyone to the half-sibling. The group chat descended into complete chaos. People were calling each other. People were leaving the chat. People were adding people back to the chat, just so they could yell at them directly. My mom called me crying, asking how everything had fallen apart so fast. I told her about Melissa and James. I told her about Aunt Carol and the embezzlement. I figured if we were burning everything down, we might as well be thorough. My dad made the executive decision to cancel the reunion. He posted in the group chat that given recent revelations, perhaps it was best if we postponed indefinitely. Half the family responded with relief. The other half responded with anger, saying we should work through our problems together. Someone pointed out that this was exactly why we didn't do reunions, because our family was a mess, and distance made it easier to pretend we weren't. We cancelled the venue, got most of our deposit back since it was far enough in advance. My mum stopped talking to Aunt Carol. Aunt Susan filed for divorce. Melissa's husband found out about the affair through the family grapevine, and that marriage imploded too. Uncle Steve's secret kid reached out to several family members individually, and some people met them, others refused. Thanksgiving that year was the smallest gathering we'd ever had. Just my immediate family and a couple of cousins who weren't involved in any of the scandals. We didn't talk about the reunion. We didn't talk about the family. We just ate turkey and pretended the last few months hadn't happened. The group chat still exists, but it's been silent for months now. Every once in a while, someone will post a generic happy birthday to someone, and a few people will respond with emojis, but that's it. The family that was supposed to reconnect and heal instead splintered into a dozen different factions, all nursing grudges and protecting secrets that aren't secret anymore. All because I asked about an RSVP. One single question about who Rachel was, and the entire house of cards collapsed. Makes you wonder how many other families are held together by nothing but distance and deliberate ignorance. The funniest part, if you can call it funny, is that we never even made it to the reunion. All that drama, all those revelations, and we didn't even get to have the awkward conversations over potato salad that we were apparently destined for. We just skipped straight to the aftermath, but calculated betrayals weren't just reserved for family gatherings. The most carefully planned schemes happened in places you'd never expect, like right inside your own workplace. I got to the office 15 minutes early that Tuesday, not because I'm some overachiever who loves morning meetings, but because I'd forgotten my laptop charger the night before and needed to grab it before our 9 a.m. project sync. The conference room was on the third floor, and as I walked down the hallway, I could hear voices coming from inside. That was weird. The meeting wasn't supposed to start for another 12 minutes. I heard my name, clear as day, through the door. My manager Sarah's voice saying something about timeline and my projects. I stopped walking. Something in my gut told me to stay quiet and listen. I moved closer to the door, which was cracked open just slightly, and that's when I heard the full sentence. We'll need to handle the transition carefully when we let her go next month. Can't have clients noticing the gap. My heart started pounding. Let me go. Next month. I stood there frozen, listening to my own manager discuss my termination like it was already decided. Another voice chimed in, someone from HR, I think, asking about the replacement. Sarah said they'd already done preliminary interviews and had a strong candidate lined up. They just needed to finalize the severance package and timeline. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Got about 8 minutes of conversation through that cracked door. They discussed how they'd distribute my accounts, which projects would transfer to other team members, how they'd spin it to upper management. Sarah mentioned something about performance concerns, which was complete garbage considering I'd exceeded every metric for the last 2 quarters. Then came the part that made my blood boil. She said the new hire would be a better culture fit and that her niece had so much potential. Her niece. She was pushing me out to hire her own niece. I left before anyone came out of that room. Went back to my desk, transferred the recording to my laptop, and backed it up in 3 different places. Then I spent the rest of that day in a weird fog, pretending everything was normal while internally spiraling about what I'd just heard. That night, I started documenting everything. Every successful project I'd led, every client testimonial, every exceeded goal, every piece of positive feedback I'd received. I pulled performance reviews going back 3 years, built a whole portfolio of evidence that I was not only meeting expectations, but crushing them. Sarah's claims about performance concerns were going to be real hard to justify against actual data. Then I did something I probably should have done years ago. I updated my resume and started reaching out to competitors. Not in a panicked way, just very strategically letting people in my network know I was open to conversations. The industry I work in is pretty small, and my reputation apparently preceded me because I had 3 companies reach out within 48 hours. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. 10 days after that recording, I had 3 formal job offers. All of them were significant upgrades, better titles, better teams, and salary increases that ranged from 30 to 45%, more than what I was currently making. I took a day to think it through and accepted the offer that felt like the best fit. 40% raise, better benefits, actual career growth potential, and a boss who didn't view me as disposable. Then I scheduled a meeting with HR and Sarah's boss, the VP of our division. Told them I had some concerns about workplace conduct I needed to discuss. They probably thought I was going to complain about a coworker or something minor. I walked into that meeting with printed transcripts of the recording, the audio file queued up on my laptop, and my documentation folder. I played them the recording. Watched their faces change as they heard Sarah discussing my termination, heard her mention the niece, heard the HR person asking about severance packages. The VP looked physically uncomfortable. The HR director started taking notes immediately. Sarah, who'd been called into the meeting halfway through, went completely pale and tried to interrupt, said I was taking things out of context, that it was just hypothetical planning for worst-case scenarios. I cut her off and asked why she'd be hypothetically planning to replace me with her niece if I was performing well. Asked her to explain the performance concerns she'd mentioned in the recording, when my actual reviews showed the opposite. She stuttered through some excuse about future projections and strategic restructuring. The HR director asked if she had any documentation of these performance issues. Sarah said it was mostly informal observations, nothing officially written up yet. The VP asked me directly what I wanted. I told him I already had another job lined up and would be giving my 2 weeks' notice regardless. But I wanted it on record what had happened, and I wanted assurance that this kind of thing wouldn't happen to whoever came after me. Also, maybe someone should look into how many of Sarah's relatives worked in the company, because nepotism seemed to be a pattern. Things went from bad to unhinged. HR launched a full investigation. Turned out Sarah had hired 2 other family members in the last 18 months, both into positions they were questionably qualified for. She'd also pushed out another employee last year under similar circumstances, and that person had just accepted the severance and left quietly without fighting it. The company was lucky that person hadn't sued. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the next day, made it official, sent the email to HR, and copied the VP. Sarah was removed from management duties immediately pending the investigation. They offered to let me work from home for my remaining 2 weeks, which I appreciated because the office had gotten incredibly awkward. Sarah was demoted by the end of my first week of notice. Not fired, which annoyed me, but moved to an individual contributor role with no direct reports and definitely no hiring authority. Her niece's job offer was rescinded. The other family members she'd hired were put on performance improvement plans. The whole department got a memo about nepotism policies and proper termination procedures. My last day was beautifully uneventful. I handed over my projects, did my exit interview where I was professionally honest about everything, and walked out of that building knowing I'd stood up for myself in a way that actually mattered. Started my new job 2 weeks later. The difference was night and day. A manager who actually valued my contributions, a team that respected my expertise, and a salary that reflected my actual worth. That 40% raise translated to an extra $32,000 a year. I bought myself a really nice dinner the day my first paycheck hit. I ran into Sarah about 6 months later at an industry conference. She saw me, turned around, and walked the other way. Fine by me. I was there representing my new company, speaking on a panel about leadership and team development. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The thing about that whole situation is that it could have gone so differently. If I'd been 5 minutes later that morning, if the door had been fully closed, if I hadn't trusted my gut and stopped to listen, I would have been blindsided by a termination I never saw coming. Instead, I got to control my own narrative and leave on my terms. Best revenge really is success. Sarah's still at that company in her demoted role, probably seething every time she sees my LinkedIn updates about my new position and accomplishments. Meanwhile, I'm thriving in a place that actually appreciates what I bring to the table. Recordings became a theme in my life, actually, because I later discovered someone much closer had been documenting me without permission. The lies started small, little things that didn't quite add up. She'd say she was at the gym, but her gym bag would still be in the closet, untouched. She'd mention grabbing coffee with a coworker whose name I'd never heard before. Individually, these things were nothing, but they started piling up, and I'm not an idiot. I can recognize a pattern. I finally asked her about it one night after she came home 2 hours later than she'd said she would. Kept it calm, non-accusatory, just asked if everything was okay and if there was something we needed to talk about. She got defensive at first, which already felt like confirmation. Then she broke down and admitted she'd been meeting up with her ex. Just as friends, she insisted. They'd run into each other a few weeks ago and had been getting coffee occasionally to catch up. I was hurt. Not devastated, but hurt. We'd been together for almost 3 years, and the fact that she'd hidden this felt like a breach of trust. But I also understood that people can be friends with their exes, and maybe she'd kept it secret because she knew I'd be uncomfortable. We talked it through. She apologized for lying, promised to be more transparent, said it really was just friendly catch-ups and nothing more. I believed her. Or at least, I wanted to believe her. Things seemed better for a couple weeks after that conversation. She made an effort to communicate more, and I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Then one Saturday afternoon, my laptop died in the middle of working on something important. She was out running errands, so I grabbed hers from the living room. We'd used each other's computers before, no big deal. I opened it up and there were several folders open on the desktop from whatever she'd been working on earlier. One of them was labeled Voice Memos, Evidence. My stomach dropped before I even clicked on it. I sat there staring at that folder name for probably a full minute, trying to convince myself it was something work-related or innocent. But I knew. Something in my gut already knew what I was about to find. I opened it. Hundreds of audio files, organized by date, going back months. I clicked on one at random. It was us having an argument from 3 weeks prior about whose turn it was to do dishes. The whole thing, recorded without my knowledge. I clicked another one, me on the phone with my best friend, venting about stress at work. Another one, a private conversation we'd had about my family. She'd been recording everything, and here's where it gets absurd. I started going through the files more systematically. Some of them had notes attached in the file names: him yelling, anger issues, aggressive tone. I opened those specific ones. They were edited. She'd cut out her parts of arguments, removed context, spliced together pieces to make me sound unstable. In one recording, I sounded like I was screaming at her out of nowhere. But I remembered that fight. She'd accused me of something completely false, and I'd raised my voice in frustration after she kept pushing. Her accusations and the full context were edited out. Just my reaction remained. I felt physically sick. This wasn't just a privacy violation. She'd been systematically building a case against me, creating evidence to paint me as some kind of abusive partner. I thought about what would happen if we broke up and she took these recordings to mutual friends, or posted them online, or used them in some legal context. My reputation would be destroyed based on manufactured evidence. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I copied the entire folder to a flash drive and called a friend who's a lawyer. Explained the situation. He told me that in our state, recording someone without their consent in a private setting is illegal. What she'd done wasn't just unethical, it was actually criminal. He referred me to someone who specialized in this kind of thing. The attorney I met with was incredible. She reviewed everything, confirmed it was illegal wiretapping under state law, and advised me on next steps. She said I could pursue criminal charges if I wanted to, but first I needed to secure my own evidence and end the relationship safely. She offered to be present when I confronted my girlfriend, which honestly I was grateful for because I had no idea how someone capable of this would react. I scheduled the confrontation for a Wednesday evening, had the attorney come to our apartment. When my girlfriend walked in and saw a stranger sitting on our couch next to me, her face went white. She asked what was going on. I told her I knew about the recordings, watched her try to formulate a response, saw her mentally cycling through potential excuses. She went with denial first, said I was being paranoid, that I must have misunderstood something. I pulled out my laptop and played one of the edited recordings, then played the full, unedited version I'd recovered from the file metadata. Her face crumbled. The attorney introduced herself and explained that what my girlfriend had done was a felony in our state. Then came the breaking point. My girlfriend started panicking, crying, begging, saying she was just protecting herself, that she'd been in a bad relationship before and wanted evidence in case I turned out to be like her ex. Except I'd met her ex. Nice guy. We'd actually gotten along when we ran into him once. Her story didn't add up, and even if it didn't justify secretly recording someone for months and editing files to misrepresent them. She asked what I wanted. I told her I was done, that I'd be moving out immediately, and that I'd already filed a police report. The attorney handed her paperwork for a restraining order I was pursuing. My girlfriend went from apologetic to angry in seconds, started yelling about how I was overreacting, how I was ruining her life over nothing. The attorney calmly reminded her that she was currently proving why the restraining order was necessary. I packed my essentials that night and stayed with my friend, filed the restraining order the next morning. The police investigation moved forward based on my evidence. Her lawyer tried to argue that the recordings were for personal safety, but the edited files and the sheer volume of recordings undermined that defense. You don't need hundreds of secretly recorded conversations for safety. That's surveillance. The criminal case is still ongoing, but she's facing charges for illegal wiretapping. The restraining order was granted. I had to get a new phone number because she tried contacting me through various means before the order went into effect. Mutual friends were confused at first, but when details started coming out, most of them cut ties with her. The wildest part is thinking about how long this went on without me knowing. How many conversations happened that I thought were private. How many moments of vulnerability I shared that were being recorded and potentially weaponized. It's violating in a way that's hard to articulate. I sleep better now knowing she can't do this to anyone else, or at least that there's a legal record of what she's capable of. The next person she dates will hopefully do a background check, and I've learned to trust my gut when small lies start adding up, because they're usually signs of much bigger problems underneath. Recording someone without permission says everything about who they are as a person. The level of premeditation, the manipulation, the willingness to destroy someone's reputation with manufactured evidence. It's sociopathic behavior dressed up as self-protection. But surveillance wasn't always about paranoia. Sometimes it captured exactly what you needed to see, especially when accusations were being thrown around. My daughter came home from school on a Wednesday afternoon with red, puffy eyes and wouldn't talk to me for the first 20 minutes. Just went straight to her room and shut the door. That's not like her. She's 8 years old and usually can't wait to tell me about her day, even the boring parts, so I knew something was seriously wrong. I gave her some space, then knocked on her door and asked if we could talk. She finally opened up and told me that her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had accused her of stealing another student's art supplies, expensive markers and colored pencils that had gone missing from someone's desk. Mrs. Patterson had apparently pulled my daughter aside in front of the whole class and told her that stealing was serious, that her parents would be disappointed, and that we'd need to replace the stolen items. My daughter was mortified. She kept insisting she didn't take anything, that she didn't even know whose supplies they were talking about. But Mrs. Patterson had been firm, even suggested in front of other parents during pickup that my daughter might have behavioral issues we should look into. I felt my blood pressure rising just hearing about it. I know my kid. She's not perfect, no 8-year-old is, but she's not a thief. She once found $1 on the playground and turned it into the office. The idea that she'd steal another kid's art supplies made 0 sense. But more than that, something about the way this teacher had handled it felt off. Why single out my daughter with no evidence? Why make accusations in front of other students and parents? I emailed Mrs. Patterson that night requesting a meeting to discuss the situation. Got a reply the next morning with a time slot for Friday. When I showed up, she had this condescending smile ready and started the conversation by saying she understood that it was hard for parents to accept when their children misbehaved. I cut her off and asked what evidence she had that my daughter took these supplies. She fumbled for a second, then said another student had seen my daughter near the desk where the supplies went missing. I asked which student. She said she couldn't disclose that due to privacy. I asked if there were cameras in the classroom that might have captured what actually happened. Her whole demeanor changed. Got defensive, said cameras wouldn't be necessary, that she'd been teaching for 12 years and knew when a student was lying. That response made me more suspicious than anything else. If you're so confident in your accusation, why wouldn't you want video proof? I thanked her for her time and went straight to the principal's office. This is where patience finally snapped. I requested a formal meeting with the principal and asked for any available camera footage from the classroom to be reviewed. The school had security cameras in hallways and common areas, but I wasn't sure about individual classrooms. Turns out this particular classroom did have a camera, installed the previous year after some equipment had been vandalized. The principal said he'd look into it and get back to me. 3 days later, I got a call asking me to come to the school immediately. The principal's tone was serious, but I couldn't read whether this was good or bad news for us. I showed up within 30 minutes, sitting in his office with the principal, the vice principal, and a very pale-looking Mrs. Patterson. The principal pulled up the camera footage on his computer and turned the screen toward me. The timestamp showed the day the supplies went missing. I watched students working at their desks, Mrs. Patterson moving around the room. Then a boy got up from his seat, walked over to another student's desk while that student was at the pencil sharpener, and took a zippered pouch from the desk, slipped it right into his backpack, clear as day. The principal paused the footage and zoomed in on the boy's face. Then he told me something that made my jaw drop. That was Mrs. Patterson's son. He was in the same class. She'd watched her own kid steal those supplies and then blamed my daughter to protect him. But that wasn't even the worst part. The vice principal explained that once they started reviewing footage, they'd gone back through the last few months, found multiple instances of Mrs. Patterson's son taking things, breaking things, pushing other kids, and in several cases she'd blamed other students. My daughter wasn't the first kid she'd falsely accused to cover for her own child. She'd been doing this all year. I looked at Mrs. Patterson and asked her directly why she blamed my daughter. She started crying, said she panicked, that she didn't want her son to get in trouble, that she was just trying to protect him. I asked if she understood what she'd done to my daughter's reputation, how she'd humiliated her in front of her classmates. Mrs. Patterson just kept apologizing. The principal told me Mrs. Patterson was being placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. He apologized profusely for what had happened and said my daughter would receive a formal apology from both the teacher and the school. He also mentioned they'd be reaching out to the families of other students who'd been falsely accused. I went home and told my daughter that the school had figured out what really happened, that she'd been telling the truth, and that the teacher had made a mistake. She asked if she'd still have to go back to that class. I told her Mrs. Patterson wouldn't be her teacher anymore. She seemed relieved, but also kind of sad, which broke my heart. She'd spent months in a classroom with a teacher who was willing to throw innocent kids under the bus to protect her own child. The investigation wrapped up about 2 weeks later. Mrs. Patterson was transferred to a non-classroom administrative role, basically pushing papers in the district office with no direct contact with students. Her son was moved to a different school. The families of the other kids who'd been falsely accused were notified, and a couple of them were apparently considering legal action. My daughter got a new teacher who's been wonderful. Her confidence came back gradually. But I think about how differently this could have gone if I hadn't trusted my gut, if I'd just accepted the teacher's word and punished my daughter for something she didn't do. How many other parents had done exactly that throughout the year because they assumed the teacher must be right? The casual cruelty of an adult in a position of authority using that power to protect their own kid at the expense of other children is something I still can't fully wrap my head around. This woman stood in front of a classroom every day, looked these kids in the eyes, and knowingly let innocent children take the fall for her son's behavior. Trust your instincts as a parent. If something feels wrong, if your kid's story doesn't match what you're being told, ask questions. Demand evidence. Don't just accept authority figures at their word, especially when your child's reputation and well-being are on the line. Trust became a rare commodity in my life after that, especially after what I discovered on a hotel keycard that was never supposed to exist. My wife told me she was going to visit her sister for the weekend. 3 hours away, she'd be gone Friday night through Sunday afternoon. Normal enough. Her sister had been going through a rough patch with her husband, and my wife wanted to be there for her. I told her to drive safe, kissed her goodbye, and went about my weekend. Sunday morning I was doing laundry because that's apparently what I do with my free time now. Going through pockets before throwing things in the wash. Found some receipts, loose change, the usual stuff. Then I pulled a hotel key card out of her jeans pocket. One of those plastic cards with the hotel name printed on it. A hotel in our city, dated from 2 nights ago. My brain tried to rationalize it immediately. Maybe she'd stopped somewhere on the way to her sister's. Maybe she was too tired to drive the full 3 hours and got a room part way. Except the hotel name was local, like 15 minutes from our house local. And the date was Friday, the day she'd supposedly left to drive to her sister's. My hands were shaking as I turned the card over and over. There was a room number written in pen on the back, 547. I sat down on the edge of the bed and just stared at it for probably 10 minutes, trying to come up with any innocent explanation, coming up empty. I called the hotel, put on my most casual, confused voice, and explained that I'd stayed there recently, but couldn't remember my room number for my expense report. The front desk person asked for my name. I gave them a fake one, said I'd checked in Friday. They asked if I had the keycard number. There was a long string of numbers on the magnetic stripe side. I read it off. Room 547, sir. Currently occupied through tomorrow if you need to extend your stay. My heart stopped. Currently occupied. It was Sunday morning and someone was still in that room. I thanked them and hung up. I got in my car and drove to the hotel in complete autopilot. Didn't think, didn't plan, just drove. Parked in the lot and walked up to the 5th floor. Found room 547. Stood outside that door for probably 2 minutes just breathing, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to see. I knocked. 3 solid knocks that sounded way too loud in the quiet hallway. Heard movement inside. Voices. The door opened and a man stood there in a hotel robe. 30s, decent-looking, confused expression. He asked if he could help me. I looked past him into the room, saw my wife's suitcase, the blue one with the broken wheel that she always complained about. It was sitting open on the luggage rack. Then she emerged from the bathroom, probably wondering who was at the door. She saw me and her face went completely white, just frozen, like her brain couldn't process what was happening. This is where patience finally snapped. The man asked if we knew each other. I told him I was her husband, watched his face change as that information sank in. He looked at my wife, back at me, and started stammering about how he didn't know, how she told him she was separated. My wife finally found her voice and said my name, started moving toward me. I held up my hand to stop her. I asked her how long. She didn't answer. I asked the guy who he was. He said his name was Derek, that he worked with her, that they'd been seeing each other for a few months. A few months, my wife corrected him. Said 6 months. Like that distinction mattered. Like the specific timeline of her betrayal was the important detail here. I pulled out my phone and took photos. The room, the suitcase, both of them standing there looking guilty. Derek asked what I was doing. I told him I was documenting evidence for my divorce attorney. My wife started crying, saying we needed to talk, that she could explain. I asked what there was to explain. She'd been telling me she was visiting her sister while actually checking into hotels with her coworker. Pretty straightforward. She tried to follow me into the hallway. I told her to stay there, that I'd have someone contact her about picking up her things. She asked where she was supposed to go. I suggested she figure that out with Derek, since they'd clearly been making plans together. Then I left. Walked out of that hotel, got in my car, and drove home in complete silence. Called a divorce attorney first thing Monday morning. Had a consultation by Tuesday afternoon. Filed by Thursday. My wife had been blowing up my phone the entire time, alternating between apologies and accusations that I was overreacting. Overreacting to 6 months of calculated lies and infidelity. Right. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The attorney said the evidence was about as ironclad as it gets. Hotel records, photos, the key card itself which I'd kept. My wife's lawyer tried to push for reconciliation counseling, suggested we were making rash decisions. I told my attorney I wanted this done as quickly and cleanly as possible. I didn't want her money or revenge, I just wanted out. She tried to contact me directly a few times, showed up at the house once while I was there packing some of her things, wanted to explain that it wasn't about me, that she still loved me, that Derek was just a mistake that got out of hand. I asked her which of the 6 months was the mistake. The first month when she decided to start the affair? The third month when she was actively lying to my face? The 6th month when she'd apparently gotten so comfortable with the deception that she was using local hotels? She didn't have an answer for that. Just cried and said she never meant to hurt me. I told her that intent doesn't matter when the outcome is the same. She'd made a choice every single day for half a year to continue lying to me. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. The image of her face when she walked out of that bathroom and saw me standing there is something I don't think I'll ever forget. Pure terror mixed with the realization that everything was about to collapse. That moment when someone who's been living a double life suddenly has both lives collide in the worst possible way. The divorce was finalized about 4 months later. She'd apparently broken things off with Derek pretty quickly after I found out. Not that it mattered. I heard through mutual friends that she tried to frame the whole thing as a rough patch in our marriage that she'd handled badly. Most people saw through that pretty quickly, especially once details started getting around. I moved out of the house we'd shared, found an apartment across town, started rebuilding my life without someone in it who'd spent 6 months lying to my face while maintaining a whole separate relationship. The trust I'd had in her, in us, in the future we'd supposedly been building together, all of it evaporated the second I saw that hotel keycard. People ask me sometimes if I regret going to the hotel, if maybe ignorance would have been better, but I don't think so. Finding out the way I did gave me certainty. No room for doubt, no possibility that I'd misunderstood or overreacted. Just clear, undeniable proof that my marriage had been a facade for half a year. Cheating seemed to be an epidemic, honestly, because I accidentally became the messenger of someone else's infidelity next. My friend Sarah had been complaining for weeks about her husband working late. Every night it seemed like he had some urgent project or client meeting that kept him at the office until 9 or 10 p.m. She'd mention it casually over coffee, half joking about how she barely saw him anymore, but I could tell it was wearing on her. She looked tired, stressed, like she was carrying something heavier than just an absent spouse. I wanted to do something nice for her, and honestly for him too. Thought maybe if I brought him dinner at work, it would be this sweet gesture that reminded him his wife cared, that someone was thinking about him during these long hours. Sarah mentioned he'd been particularly swamped that week, so on Thursday evening I picked up food from his favorite Italian place and drove to his office building downtown. The security guard at the front desk knew me from previous visits when I'd met Sarah there for lunch. I told him I had dinner for Sarah's husband and asked which floor. He looked confused and checked his log. Told me Sarah's husband had left around 4:30 that afternoon. I laughed it off, said maybe I'd gotten the day wrong, and walked back to my car feeling this weird knot forming in my stomach. I sat there in the parking lot with cooling pasta on my passenger seat and texted Sarah, asked casually if her husband had made it home yet. She replied almost immediately, "No, still at work. Probably won't be home until late." I stared at that message for a long time. He wasn't at work. The security guard had been certain. So where was he? I should have left. Should have just driven home and convinced myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd gone to a different location. Maybe he was meeting a client somewhere else. But something in my gut told me to wait. So I sat in that parking lot like a creep, watching the building entrance, trying to figure out what to do with this information. That's when everything unraveled. About 20 minutes later, I saw his car pull into the parking lot of a restaurant across the street. Not a business dinner kind of place, but one of those intimate Italian spots with dim lighting and candles on every table. I watched him get out of his car, check his phone, and walk toward the entrance. Then a woman appeared from the other direction. She was younger, dressed nice, and when she reached him, he kissed her. Not a friendly peck, a real kiss. Then they held hands walking into the restaurant. I felt physically sick, like I'd witnessed something I could never unsee. This wasn't my business, this wasn't my marriage, but Sarah was my friend, and she was sitting at home thinking her husband was working late while he was actually on a date with another woman. I grabbed my phone and took photos, got clear shots of him, her, them together. My hands were shaking the whole time. I drove to Sarah's house, didn't call ahead, didn't plan what I was going to say. Just showed up at her door at 7:30 on a Thursday night, holding cold Italian food and evidence that her marriage was a lie. She opened the door, smiling, probably assuming I'd just stopped by to hang out. The smile faded when she saw my face. We sat at her kitchen table and I showed her the photos. Watched her face crumble as she processed what she was seeing. She kept asking if I was sure it was him, like maybe there was some mistake, even though the photos were crystal clear. Then she just started crying. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that made me feel like the worst person alive for being the one to deliver this news. But that wasn't even the worst part. Sarah called him, put it on speaker, asked where he was. He said the office, same lie he'd been telling for who knows how long. She asked him to describe what he was working on. He made up some elaborate story about spreadsheets and quarterly reports. She let him talk, let him dig himself deeper. Then asked one more time if he was absolutely certain he was at the office. He got annoyed, asked why she was interrogating him. That's when she told him I was sitting in her kitchen with photos of him kissing another woman an hour ago. The silence on the other end of that call was deafening. Then he started stammering, trying to explain, but there was no explanation that would make this okay. Sarah told him not to come home that night, that she needed space to think. He tried to argue, but she hung up on him. He showed up anyway, about an hour later. I was still there because Sarah had asked me to stay. He walked in and saw me sitting at the kitchen table with her, and his face went red. Started yelling about how I had no right to spy on him, how this was none of my business, how I'd ruined everything. Sarah cut him off and told him to tell her the truth about who the woman was. He broke down and confessed. 2-year affair with his assistant. Started as an emotional thing, became physical about 6 months in. He claimed he still loved Sarah, that it was a mistake, that he wanted to work it out. Sarah looked at him with this cold expression I'd never seen on her before and told him to get out. He tried to plead his case, but she physically walked to the door and opened it. Told him if he wasn't gone in 60 seconds, she was calling the police. He left. Sarah filed for divorce the following week. Her lawyer was ruthless. The affair, the lies, the evidence I'd provided all worked in her favor. She took him for everything in the settlement. The house, most of the savings, his retirement account got split in a way that heavily favored her. He tried to fight it, but his lawyer advised him to settle before things got even messier. Sarah thanked me multiple times throughout the divorce process, said I'd given her the truth she needed even if it destroyed her, but things between us were never quite the same after that. I think I became associated with the worst day of her life. Every time she looked at me, she remembered finding out her husband was cheating. We still talk occasionally, still meet for coffee sometimes, but there's this distance now that wasn't there before. The messenger really does get burned sometimes, even when you're just trying to help. I wonder if I should have handled it differently, if there was a way to tell her that wouldn't have permanently altered our friendship. But honestly, I don't know what that would have looked like. The truth was the truth, and she deserved to know it. Her ex-husband still works with that assistant, by the way. They're apparently together now, which feels like the universe has a dark sense of humor. Sarah's dating someone new, seems happy, says she's grateful to be out of that marriage. But I can tell part of her still hurts, and part of me still feels guilty for being the catalyst that blew up her life. Affairs weren't the only things that got messengers burned. The truth you delivered had a way of coming back to haunt you in ways you never expected. Family dinners at my aunt's house were usually pretty standard. Too much food, awkward small talk, my younger cousins running around breaking things. This particular dinner started out exactly like that. About 20 people crammed into her dining room, passing dishes around, the usual chaos. Then my cousin Emma stood up and clinked her glass, like she was about to make a toast. She announced she was pregnant. Everyone immediately started cheering and congratulating her. My aunt started crying happy tears. My mum was already asking about due dates and baby names. Emma was beaming, soaking in the attention. Then she said something that made the entire room go silent. She said the father was Tom, and she couldn't wait to start their life together. Tom, my uncle's best friend, Tom. Tom who was sitting 3 seats down from her. Tom who was married. Tom whose wife Sarah was literally sitting right next to him at that same table. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before everything exploded. Sarah stood up so fast her chair fell backward, started screaming at Tom, asking if this was real, if he'd actually gotten Emma pregnant. Tom went completely white, looked like he was about to pass out. My aunt was staring at Emma like she didn't recognize her own daughter. My uncle was frozen, clearly trying to process that his best friend had been sleeping with his niece. Emma started crying, saying that she and Tom were in love, that they'd been seeing each other for almost a year, that she knew it was complicated, but they couldn't help their feelings. Sarah threw her wine glass, just full on threw it across the table. It shattered against the wall. My uncle's kids started crying because they'd never seen adults act like this. My mum was trying to calm everyone down, but nobody was listening. Sarah grabbed her purse and stormed out. Tom followed her, trying to explain, and we could hear them screaming at each other in the driveway. My aunt was demanding to know how long this had been going on, why Emma would do this, how she could be so selfish. Emma was sobbing, saying nobody understood, that Tom was leaving Sarah anyway, that the pregnancy just sped up the timeline. That's when everything unraveled. My uncle confronted Tom when he came back inside, without Sarah, asked him how he could do this, how he could betray their friendship and his marriage. Tom tried to justify it, said he and Sarah had been having problems for years, that what he had with Emma was real. My uncle told him to get out of his house. Tom left. Emma ran upstairs to her old bedroom. Half the family followed to try to talk to her. The other half just sat there in stunned silence. I stayed downstairs helping my mum clean up broken glass and trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't some dramatic reveal I'd been expecting. I knew Emma had been seeing someone, but she'd been secretive about it. Now I understood why. The guy was 20 years older than her, married and best friends with her uncle. The whole situation was a disaster. The dinner obviously ended early. Everyone left within the next hour. The family group chat that had been so cheerful earlier was now a war zone. People were taking sides, arguing about who was more at fault, debating whether Emma and Tom's relationship was legitimate or just an affair that got out of hand. It was a mess. Then, 2 days later, I started getting angry messages from Emma. She was telling everyone that I'd ruined her announcement by inviting Tom's wife, that I'd deliberately created drama because I was jealous of her pregnancy, that the whole disaster was my fault. I was genuinely confused because I hadn't invited anyone. I wasn't even hosting the dinner. I texted my mom asking what Emma was talking about. My mom explained that she'd invited Tom and Sarah because my uncle had asked her to. They were family friends, they'd been at family dinners before, it was completely normal. But Emma had apparently convinced herself that I was behind it, that I'd orchestrated some kind of dramatic reveal to embarrass her, which was insane because I had no idea she was even pregnant, let alone that Tom was the father. And here's where it gets absurd. Emma started telling extended family members that I'd known about her relationship with Tom and had intentionally sabotaged her announcement. Cousins I barely talked to were messaging me, asking why I'd do something so cruel. My aunt, who was already devastated about the whole situation, started giving me cold shoulders at family events because she believed Emma's version of events. I tried to defend myself, explained that I had nothing to do with the guest list, that I'd been just as shocked as everyone else. Some people believe me, others seem to prefer Emma's narrative because it gave them someone to blame who wasn't Emma or Tom. I became the scapegoat. Both marriages ended in divorce within months. Sarah filed immediately, took Tom for everything she could in the settlement. My aunt and uncle's marriage didn't survive either. My aunt couldn't forgive my uncle for bringing Tom into their lives, for maintaining a friendship with someone who'd do this to his family. The blame and resentment poisoned everything. Tom left Sarah for Emma like he'd promised. They moved in together, started preparing for the baby, but Tom's kids, who were teenagers, wanted nothing to do with him. Refused to meet Emma, refused to acknowledge the pregnancy, cut him off completely. Tom's parents disowned him. Sarah's family threatened legal action over something, I'm not even sure what. The family fractured into camps. Half blamed Emma for pursuing a married man and destroying 2 marriages. Half blamed Tom for being weak and selfish. Some people tried to stay neutral, but that was basically impossible. And somehow, despite having absolutely nothing to do with any of it, I became the villain in Emma's story. Family events became unbearable. Every gathering turned into tense, uncomfortable affairs where people avoided certain topics and certain people sat on opposite sides of the room. Emma would show up with Tom and her growing belly, and half the family would refuse to acknowledge them. The other half would overcompensate with enthusiasm to prove they were supportive. I stopped going to most family events after about 6 months of this. Told my mum I loved her, but I wasn't interested in being blamed for a situation I had no control over. She understood. My dad was furious on my behalf, actually got into an argument with my aunt about the accusations against me. That just created more family drama. Emma had the baby, a girl, sent out birth announcements to the whole family. Tom's kids still won't meet their half-sister. Sarah apparently sent a scathing message that I won't repeat, but that made Emma cry for days, according to my mum. My aunt and uncle's divorce finalized right around the same time. The timing felt grimly poetic. The thing about truth is that sometimes announcing it really does destroy everything around it. Emma and Tom's relationship was going to blow up eventually, but doing it at a family dinner in front of everyone, including Tom's wife, was a choice that had consequences, and instead of taking responsibility for those consequences, Emma found someone else to blame. I see updates occasionally through my mum. Emma and Tom are still together, apparently happy, raising their daughter, but they're essentially cut off from most of both families. Tom's relationship with his older kids is destroyed, maybe permanently. My aunt is in therapy. My uncle remarried someone from his office. The family that used to gather for dinners and holidays is scattered and broken. And I'm still somehow the villain in Emma's version of this story, the jealous cousin who ruined her perfect moment. Never mind that her perfect moment was announcing an affair baby to a room that included the betrayed wife. But sure, I'm the problem. Being blamed for things I didn't do became almost a pattern, especially when a certain neighbor decided to weaponize lies against me. I started noticing the weird looks about 3 months after I moved into the neighborhood. People who'd been friendly before suddenly crossed the street when they saw me coming. Conversations would stop when I walked past. Someone actually pulled their kid away from me at the mailbox like I was dangerous. I had no idea what was going on. Then one afternoon, my next-door neighbor Linda came over looking uncomfortable. She asked if we could talk privately. We sat on my porch and she told me that there was a rumor going around that I was running some kind of drug operation out of my garage. I actually laughed at first because it was so absurd, but she wasn't laughing. She said people were genuinely concerned, that someone had been spreading detailed stories about suspicious activity, people coming and going at odd hours, packages being delivered constantly. I was mortified. I asked who was saying this. She hesitated, then told me it was Greg, my neighbor from across the street. Greg, who I'd maybe spoken to twice since moving in. Greg, who always seemed to be watching from his window whenever I was outside. He'd apparently been telling anyone who would listen that he'd witnessed drug deals, that he'd seen suspicious characters hanging around my property, that something illegal was definitely happening. I tried to explain to Linda that I ran a completely legitimate online vintage clothing business from home. That's why I got packages. That's why people occasionally stopped by to pick up items they'd purchased. That's why my garage was full of racks of clothes and shipping supplies. She believed me, said she'd try to set the record straight, but the damage was already done. Half the neighborhood thought I was a criminal. I was furious, but also kind of scared. False accusations like that could destroy my business, get me investigated, ruin my reputation permanently. I didn't know what to do. Then I decided to document everything. I installed security cameras around my property, covering the driveway, garage, front door, and backyard. If Greg was going to keep spreading lies, I wanted evidence of what was actually happening at my house. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The cameras caught Greg multiple times, recording my garage from the street with his phone, taking photos of my house at weird hours. But the worst part was when I reviewed footage from trash day. Greg came over after I'd put my bins out, went through my garbage, and took photos of shipping labels and receipts. He was literally digging through my trash looking for evidence to support his made-up story. I was shaking watching that footage. This wasn't just neighborhood gossip. This was targeted harassment. I kept recording, building a file of every instance of Greg surveilling my property. 2 weeks of footage showing him obsessively monitoring my house, taking photos, recording video, going through my trash. It was genuinely creepy. I also pulled together documentation of my business, my LLC registration, my business license, my tax returns showing legitimate income from online sales, testimonials from customers, my entire inventory system. Everything proving I was running a normal, legal small business. Then I found out why Greg was doing this. Linda came back over with information she'd pieced together from talking to other neighbors. Greg wanted my property. Specifically, he wanted my corner lot because it was larger and had better placement than his. He'd apparently approached the previous owners about buying before they'd even listed it, but they'd chosen to sell to me instead. His plan was to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that I'd be desperate to leave. Then he could swoop in and buy the house cheap. The audacity of trying to ruin someone's life over real estate. I compiled everything into a folder, all the camera footage of Greg harassing me, screenshots of my business documentation, a timeline of the rumors and their impact on my life and business, testimonials from neighbors about what Greg had told them. Then I sent it to the HOA with a formal harassment complaint. Also sent copies to the police. The HOA took it seriously. They'd been getting complaints about my property based on Greg's stories, and now they had proof those stories were completely fabricated. They launched an investigation into Greg's conduct. The police were less helpful, but did go talk to him about the trash digging and surveillance, which apparently is legally questionable depending on circumstances. Then came the breaking point. The HOA mandated that Greg had to publicly retract his statements. They sent a letter to every household in the neighborhood explaining that allegations against me had been investigated and found to be completely baseless, that I was running a legitimate licensed business, and that the source of the false rumors had been identified and sanctioned. They didn't name Greg directly, but everyone knew who it was. Greg was fined by the HOA for violating harassment policies, had to pay a pretty substantial amount. He also got a formal warning that any further action against me or spreading of false information would result in additional fines and potential legal action from the HOA. I also sent him a cease and desist letter from a lawyer I'd consulted, making it clear that if he continued, I'd pursue a civil case for defamation and harassment. His reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed. People who'd believed his stories about me were furious. They'd been manipulated. Linda told me several neighbors had confronted him directly. The same people who'd been avoiding me were now apologizing, explaining they'd been misled, asking about my business like normal human beings. My business actually got a boost from the whole thing. Once people knew what I actually did, several neighbors became customers. Turns out there's a market for vintage clothing in the suburbs. Who knew? I started getting referrals, invitations to neighborhood events, the whole community integration thing I'd been hoping for when I moved in. Greg's house went up for sale about 2 months after the HOA ruling. He couldn't handle living across from me after everything that had happened. The for sale sign going up felt like the ultimate vindication. He'd tried to force me out and ended up forcing himself out instead. I saw him loading a moving truck a few weeks later. He wouldn't make eye contact, just kept loading boxes while I worked in my garage, processing orders for my very legal, very legitimate business. Part of me wanted to wave to rub it in, but I just went about my day. His own actions had consequences. I didn't need to add to them. The new neighbors who bought Greg's house are lovely. They actually came over to introduce themselves and mentioned they'd heard about the situation from other neighbors during the buying process. Said they appreciated that I'd stood up for myself and documented everything. We have coffee sometimes. They buy vintage pieces from me occasionally. The whole experience taught me that some people will go to absolutely insane lengths to get what they want, even if it means destroying someone else's life in the process. But it also taught me that documentation is everything. Those cameras saved my reputation, my business, and my place in this neighborhood. Greg's out there somewhere, probably watching someone else's house from his window, plotting his next scheme. But at least he's not my problem anymore. Video evidence saved me there, but it was automatic syncing technology that accidentally saved me next. I'd been feeling crazy for months. That's the thing about gaslighting. It makes you question your own reality until you don't trust yourself anymore. My boyfriend had become distant, always on his phone, texting constantly. When I'd ask who he was talking to, he'd say it was work or his brother or some friend I'd never heard of. And when I said something felt off, he'd tell me I was being paranoid, that I was insecure, that I needed to work on my trust issues. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe my anxiety was creating problems that didn't exist. He seemed so genuine when he reassured me, so hurt that I'd question him. I felt guilty for even bringing it up, so I stopped asking. Just lived with this constant knot in my stomach and tried to convince myself everything was fine. Then one random Tuesday night, everything changed. I was lying in bed scrolling through my tablet, just mindlessly browsing before sleep. The tablet lit up with a notification, an iMessage, except it wasn't for me. It was to him, from a contact saved as just a letter. The message said, "Can't wait to see you this weekend. I've been thinking about you all day." My heart started pounding. I stared at that message, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was a friend. Then another message came through. "I know you're with her right now, but I need you to know how much I miss you." Her. The person was talking about me. I was her. That's when I remembered. Years ago, when we first started dating, we'd shared an Apple ID briefly. Just a convenience thing that we'd never bothered to undo properly. His messages were syncing to my tablet. I was seeing his texts in real time. I sat there frozen, watching the conversation unfold. He was in the living room. I could hear the TV playing, and I was watching him text another woman about how he wished he was with her instead. The woman responded with a heart emoji. He sent back, "Soon, baby, I promise. Just a few more days." I opened the full conversation thread. Months of messages, going back at least 6 months, maybe longer. I scrolled through reading everything, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the tablet. Hotel reservations, photos I definitely did not need to see. Conversations about their future together, about how he was going to leave me, about how patient she was being while he figured things out. But that wasn't even the worst part. He'd told her I was crazy, that I was paranoid and controlling, and he was only staying with me out of pity while he planned his exit. Every concern I'd voiced, every time I'd said something felt wrong, he'd gone and told her about it, mocked me for it, made me the villain in their love story. I was the obstacle they had to overcome. I started screenshotting everything, every message, every photo, every hotel confirmation. My tablet was filling up with evidence of a betrayal that had been happening right under my nose while he called me paranoid for sensing it. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I spent about 2 hours going through everything, documenting it all. Then I did something that probably seems petty, but felt necessary in the moment. I airplayed my tablet to our TV, set up a slideshow of the screenshots, turned the volume up on the TV so he'd hear it from the living room. I heard him call my name, asking what I was watching. I told him to come to the bedroom. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked in and saw his own messages displayed on our TV in high definition. Just complete terror, followed by this desperate scrambling for an explanation. He tried everything, said it wasn't what it looked like, that she was obsessed with him and he'd been trying to let her down easy, that the messages were taken out of context. I just sat there on the bed, completely calm, and asked him to explain the context that would make "I love you more than anything" and hotel reservations make sense. Things went from bad to unhinged. He switched tactics, started crying, saying he'd made a mistake, that he loved me, that she meant nothing. I pointed at the TV where his message saying, "You mean everything to me," was literally displayed. He said he was confused, that he didn't know what he wanted. I told him that was fine, but he wouldn't be figuring it out in my apartment. I'd already packed a box of his things while watching the slideshow. Basics, enough to get him through a few days. I handed it to him along with a printed stack of screenshots, told him he had an hour to get the rest of his stuff or I'd leave it on the curb. He tried to argue, to negotiate, to ask for another chance. I just stood there holding the door open. He called his brother to help move his stuff. I watched them load his belongings into a truck, both of them silent. The brother gave me this apologetic look like he knew what had happened. Maybe he did. Maybe everyone knew except me. That thought made me feel sick all over again. After they left, I changed the locks, blocked his number, blocked the woman's number which I now had from the messages, blocked him on every social media platform. I wanted zero avenues for him to try to worm his way back or justify what he'd done. He tried anyway, messages from different numbers, emails, even showed up once but I didn't answer the door. Eventually he gave up. I heard through mutual friends that he and the woman got together officially. They're apparently still together. Good for them, I guess. They deserve each other. The thing that still gets me is that I wasn't paranoid. My gut was right the entire time. Every instinct that told me something was wrong was correct, and he convinced me to ignore it. Made me feel crazy for trusting myself. That's the part that's hard to forgive. Not even the cheating itself, but the gaslighting. The systematic destruction of my ability to trust my own perception. Technology betrayed him, but it saved me. If those messages hadn't synced, if I hadn't seen that notification, I might still be in that relationship, still feeling crazy, still being told my concerns were irrational while he lived a double life. The accidental sync was the universe doing me a favor. I never shared an Apple ID with anyone again, obviously, but I also learned to trust my instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is, and anyone who tries to convince you otherwise, who calls you paranoid for noticing red flags, is probably waving the biggest red flag of all. Technology exposed betrayal in my life more than once, actually, including when automatic features revealed something my ex thought he'd hidden perfectly. After we broke up, my ex decided that ending the relationship wasn't enough. He needed to destroy me on the way out. Within a week of our split, I started getting messages from mutual friends asking if it was true that I'd cheated on him, then asking if I'd really stolen money from his account, then just general hostile messages calling me a liar and a terrible person. I was blindsided. None of it was true. We'd broken up because we wanted different things, had a few arguments that made it clear we weren't compatible long term, and decided to end it. It wasn't even that dramatic, or at least I thought it wasn't. Apparently he had other plans. The smear campaign was systematic. He'd go to friend groups we shared and tell them detailed stories about my supposed betrayal, how I'd been cheating for months with someone from work, how I'd taken money from his wallet repeatedly, how I'd lied about everything throughout our relationship. People believed him because he was convincing, because he seemed genuinely hurt, and because he got to them first with his version of events. I tried to defend myself, but it was useless. My denials just made me look more guilty. Friends who'd known me for years suddenly questioned my character. I got uninvited from group events. People stopped responding to my texts. My reputation in our social circle was completely trashed. And there was nothing I could do about it because it was his word against mine. I was devastated. Lost friends I'd had since college. Felt completely isolated and helpless. He'd weaponized our breakup and turned everyone against me with fabricated stories, and I had no way to prove they were lies. I spent weeks just staying home, avoiding social situations, trying to figure out how to rebuild my life after he'd systematically destroyed my social network. Then one random Tuesday afternoon, I got a notification on my phone. A shared album had been updated. I clicked it confused and realized it was an iCloud album from when we'd been together. We'd created it to share photos from a trip and had apparently never unlinked our accounts after the breakup. That's when I noticed something weird. Voice memos. His voice memos were uploading to the shared space automatically. I opened one. It was him talking to himself, practicing what he was going to tell people about me, literally rehearsing his lies like he was preparing for a performance. He was working out the details, making the stories more believable, adding specific dates and locations to make them sound authentic. My hands started shaking as I listened, and here's where it gets absurd. There were dozens of these voice memos. In one, he was on the phone with a friend, coaching them on what to say if anyone asked about our relationship, giving them talking points about my supposed infidelity, making sure their story matched his. In another, he was detailing his plan to destroy my life as revenge for breaking up with him. He actually said those words. I'm going to destroy her life. He'd fabricated everything, the cheating, the stealing, all of it. It was a calculated campaign of character assassination, and he'd recorded himself planning the whole thing. The timestamps on the memos went back to days after our breakup, showing this had been premeditated from the start. I sat there listening to memo after memo, hearing him strategize about how to turn people against me, how to make the lies stick, how to make sure I'd lose as many friends as possible. It was chilling. This person I'd dated for 2 years, who I'd trusted and cared about, had spent weeks plotting how to socially destroy me because I'd ended a relationship that wasn't working. I downloaded every single voice memo, made copies, backed them up in multiple places. Then I created a compilation of the most damning clips. His voice clearly stating he was making everything up. Him coaching his friend on the lies. Him literally saying, she didn't actually cheat, but if I say she did with enough detail, people will believe it. I sent it to everyone he'd lied to. Every mutual friend, every person in our social circle who'd believed his stories and cut me off. Just sent the audio file with a simple message. Here's what he really thinks. No explanation needed. His own voice told the whole story. Then came the breaking point. The backfire was instantaneous and spectacular. Friends who'd stopped talking to me started apologizing immediately. Some were horrified, some were angry at themselves for believing him. Some were just shocked. The group chat that I'd been removed from apparently exploded with people confronting him, demanding explanations. He tried to claim I'd hacked him, that I'd somehow fabricated the recordings, but the timestamps were right there on the files, synced from his own device. His voice was unmistakable. The details he mentioned matched exactly with what he'd told people. There was no way to deny it was real. People started publicly calling him out, posting about what he'd done, warning others about his behavior. Our social circle completely turned on him. He went from being the sympathetic victim of my supposed betrayal to being a manipulative liar who'd orchestrated an elaborate revenge plot over a normal breakup. He became a social pariah basically overnight. Got uninvited from the same events he'd gotten me uninvited from. People blocked him. Mutual friends chose sides, and nobody chose his. The reputation he'd tried to destroy was mine, but the one that actually got destroyed was his own. I wish I could say I felt bad about it, but I didn't. He'd set out to destroy my life over a breakup, had succeeded for weeks, and had only been caught because he was stupid enough to not realize our cloud accounts were still linked. The automatic syncing feature he'd probably forgotten existed had uploaded his entire scheme to a shared space I could access. The poetic justice of technology betraying him the same way he'd tried to betray me wasn't lost on anyone. Several people pointed out that in the age of digital everything, maybe don't record yourself planning to ruin someone's life. Just a thought. My friendship slowly rebuilt after that. People apologized, explained they should have questioned his stories more, should have talked to me before believing him. Some relationships survived, some didn't. But at least the truth was out there. At least people knew who he really was. He tried to message me a few weeks later, some rambling apology about how he'd been hurt and acted out of pain. I didn't respond, didn't block him either, just left him on read. Let him sit with the fact that his elaborate revenge plan had backfired so spectacularly that he'd destroyed his own reputation instead of mine. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different city. Fresh start, I guess. Hopefully he learned something from the experience, though I doubt it. People who are willing to systematically destroy someone's reputation over a breakup usually don't have the self-awareness for growth. The whole thing taught me that sometimes karma really is just stupidity meeting technology. He got himself caught by his own carelessness, by forgetting about a shared cloud feature, by recording evidence of his lies. I didn't have to do anything except press play and let his own voice tell the truth. And there you have it, 15 stories of betrayal, revenge, and the sweet, sweet justice that comes when the truth finally surfaces. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're officially one of us, addicted to the drama. Make sure you're subscribed because trust me, Reddit never runs out of stories, and neither do I. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, In the age of cameras, cloud storage, and auto sync, the truth always has a way of coming to light. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next one.